These are 40 phrases in Latin American Spanish that you need to know. I actually did 41 because, you know what, I gotta go above and beyond for you. Bueno, nada. La primera frase que tenemos es buenos días. Buenos días. Good morning. Now, the reason I put this on here is because it is very common in Latin America to greet someone with something like buenos días, buenas tardes, good afternoon, y buenas noches, good night. Yes, you can say hola to someone, but if you go up to a food stand in Mexico, you wouldn't necessarily say hola. Yes, of course, you can say hola, but it's more common to hear people say buenas tardes, for example, or buenos días, or buenas noches. Buenos días in the morning, buenas tardes after 12 and before sunset, and then buenas noches is once the sun has set. ¿Cómo está or cómo estás? How are you? Remember that in Spanish, we have the formal and informal. Como está is for the formal, which is the usted form. Como está usted? How are you? That's formal. And como estás? How are you? You use this informally with people that you know and trust. Todo bien. So, for example, buenos días. Hey, ¿cómo estás? Todo bien. Gracias. For example, all good or everything's fine. Todo bien. ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? ¿Cómo te llamas? You can also say ¿cómo se llama?, which is the usted formal form. However, if you're just learning Spanish and you're not sure, just focus on this. If you speak to a native Spanish speaker and you use this, the informal, instead of using the formal, no one is going to get upset because they know you're learning Spanish and it's not necessarily seen as disrespectful, okay? ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? This literally translates to how do you call yourself? ¿Cómo te llamas? Then you respond with me llamo Nate. Me llamo Nate. I call myself Nate, or my name is Nate. Hola, buenos días. Hola, ¿cómo te llamas? Me llamo Nate. Mucho gusto, Nate. Nice to meet you. Mucho gusto. Igual, likewise. Now, you can say igual or you can say igualmente. Both work. I feel like living here in Mexico, I hear igual more than I do igualmente, probably just because it's easier to say. And personally, it's the one that I use more. Okay. Mucho gusto. Igualmente or igual. Okay. Or for example, que tengas un buen día. Gracias igual or gracias igualmente. All right. Another thing that people will say here in Mexico, it's very common. When you go up to a food stand, there will be people eating there, and you can say to them, provecho, meaning enjoy your meal. For example, and they'll say, gracias. When you leave, you could say, gracias, provecho. And you say to the people when you're leaving, and they'll say, igualmente, or igual, meaning, yes, enjoy your food too, even though you already ate it. This can mean like, have a good digestion in a way. Okay? ¿De dónde eres? Where are you from? Literally, of where are you? Okay, this means where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? For usted, this would just be ¿de dónde es? So, ¿de dónde es usted? For example, yo soy de California. I am from California. Now, notice how here I just have soy. I don't need to say yo soy. It is very common that native Spanish speakers will not attach subject pronouns to verbs. So people won't say yo hablo or tú hablas. They'll just say hablo or hablas. That is why it is so important that you learn how to conjugate verbs in Spanish, because native speakers often do not use subject pronouns. So, ¿de dónde eres? Soy de California. Okay? ¿Y cuántos años tienes? And how old are you? ¿Cuántos años tienes? Literally, how many years do you have? Now be careful. Notice how in the word años, we have the ñ, which kind of makes the N and the Y sound put together in English. It wouldn't be anos because that means anuses. So make sure you say años instead of anos, okay? ¿Cuántos años tienes? Then we could respond with tengo 25 años. I am 25 years old. Tengo. Notice how in Spanish we don't say soy. We say tengo, meaning I have. It's the same thing when we say something like I am scared. I wouldn't say estoy miedo. I would say tengo miedo. Or if I'm hot, I could say tengo calor. You would not say estoy calor or estoy frío. You would say tengo calor, tengo frío, tengo miedo, or tengo 25 años. Okay? Una pregunta. Okay? I honestly use this all the time. Una pregunta is a question. However, you can use it to get someone's attention and then ask them a question. So you could say something like, disculpe, una pregunta. Excuse me, a question for you. And then you would go on to ask your question. Okay? Vos. Now, the reason I put the question mark here is not because I'm necessarily asking a question. It's just because vos in Spanish means tú. Okay, so in some Latin American countries like Argentina, Guatemala, and a few others, they will use vos for tú. Okay, so instead of saying something like, tú eres de California, for example, tú eres de California, someone from Argentina might say, vos sos de California. So I just want you to know what it is. If you don't understand how to use it yourself, don't worry. I personally can't really use vos, but I can understand it when people speak to me. That's the most important thing. If you are trying to learn Spanish from Argentina, for example, then I do recommend you learn how to use vos. And same goes for you if you're learning Spanish from Spain, castellano, right? In Latin America, we do not use the vosotros form, which is the informal form for you guys or you all. In Latin America, we only use ustedes for the formal and informal. But in Spain, they would say something like vosotros habláis español, por ejemplo. Okay? So only worry about this if you're trying to learn Spanish from Argentina or a similar country. But just so you know and you'll understand what's being said to you when someone speaks to you. Okay? ¿Qué haces? What are you doing? ¿Qué haces? Now notice how haces is in the regular present form, right? So technically this could translate to you do. For example, what do you do? ¿Qué haces en tu trabajo? What do you do in your work? But here, we'll say, what are you doing? The idea here is that we can use the regular present tense indicative when something is happening now or in the near future, okay? So, for example, ¿qué haces esta noche? What are you doing tonight? Let's say I want to hang out with you, right? I say, oye, ¿qué haces esta noche? What are you doing tonight? Now, it sounds a bit odd to say, ¿qué estás haciendo esta noche? Literally translating to what are you doing tonight? Because when I use that, it sounds like it's happening right now. That's what we call the progressive, okay? ¿Qué estás haciendo esta noche? It sounds a little bit odd. It's better to say, ¿qué haces esta noche? Or, ¿qué vas a hacer esta noche? What are you going to do today? ¿A cuánto está? Or ¿a cuánto están? For example. So, this is simply asking how much does something cost. And you can also use this one, ¿cuánto cuesta? Or ¿cuánto cuesta? But both work. So, for example, ¿a cuánto están los mangos? How much do the mangoes cost? Or, ¿cuánto cuestan los mangos? Both work, but if you want to impress people, use the first one. It's a little bit more advanced, and that will surprise people, because most foreigners will just use ¿cuánto cuesta? Or ¿cuánto cuesta? Both work, though, okay? Una ganga. This means a bargain. I love this word. Una ganga, a bargain, okay, or a deal. ¿Dónde está? ¿Dónde están? Okay. ¿Dónde está José? Where is José? ¿Dónde están mis amigos? Where are my friends? Está is singular. It's called the third person singular. So, where is Juan? Or ¿dónde está usted? Where are you? Which that doesn't really make sense, but or ¿dónde están ellos? Right? That's the third person plural. Where are they? ¿Dónde están los mangos? Where are the mangoes? Okay? Singular and plural. Hasta luego. Here in Mexico, it is way more common that when people say goodbye to each other, they will say hasta luego. Sure, you can use adios, but it sounds a bit more permanent. Hasta luego is something, hey, see you later, right? This isn't a forever goodbye. I'm going to see you again. So, hasta luego, see you later. You can also say nos vemos, meaning see you soon, all right? Literally translating to we see each other. Nos vemos, okay? This just means see you soon, all right? Hasta luego. Nos vemos, okay? Same thing. Por favor, I think you know that one. Please, you could also, if you want to go extra pro, you can say porfa. Okay, so instead of saying por favor, you can say, oye, dame dos tacos, porfa. For example, instead of saying por favor, you can say porfa, shorten it up, sound kind of cool. No hay de qué. Can you see that? No hay de qué. This is just another way to say de nada, you're welcome. This is another thing that you can impress native speakers with. Instead of saying de nada, you can say no hay de qué. Like, no worries, all good. No hay de qué. Don't mention it is a good translation there. No hay de qué. All right, I'll move to this side of the whiteboard now. Disculpe. Okay, so there are 3 different kinds of excuse me's that I've written here. Disculpe, permiso, and perdón. Disculpe is when you're trying to get someone's attention. So let's say you're sitting at a restaurant and you want to get the waiter's attention. You can say, disculpe, joven. Okay, excuse me, young man. Disculpe. All right. Disculpe is usted. That's an usted command. Or you can say disculpa, which is the informal command. In this particular situation, I recommend you use disculpe, okay, to sound a little bit more polite. Disculpe, right? So you're trying to get someone's attention. Excuse me. Permiso is when you're saying, excuse me, when you're trying to get by people. You could also use it if you kind of bump into someone, but it's more common to use it when you're trying to get by. Permiso, permiso, right? You're going through a crowd. Permiso, permiso, excuse me, okay? Like, give me permission. And next, perdón. Okay, this is when you would bump into someone. Ay, perdón. Oh, sorry, or pardon, excuse me, perdón, okay? So, disculpe, I'm trying to get your attention. Disculpe. Or, permiso, I'm trying to get by. Permiso. Or, perdón. Oh, sorry, I bumped into you. Perdón, excuse me, pardon me. Okay? Next, listo. I don't remember writing this one. Listo means ready. Okay? So, for example, if you're at a restaurant, the waiter could ask you, ¿Ustedes están listos para ordenar? For example, are you guys ready to order? Okay? Listo can also mean smart. So, I could say, eres muy listo. You are very smart or adept. Okay? But listo is most commonly used as listo, for example. Are you ready? You can just literally just say that, like a question. Listo or lista, if it's for the feminine. Okay? ¿Cómo? Now, you might have said before, ¿qué? Right? Meaning what? The reality is, it's much better to say ¿cómo instead of saying ¿qué? So, if someone says something to you and you don't understand, don't say ¿qué? Say ¿cómo? ¿Qué still makes sense, but it sounds more polite to say ¿cómo? Okay? ¿Cómo? What did you say? I didn't hear you. ¿Cómo? Okay, what? Now, ¿cómo can also mean how, depending on the context, right? ¿Cómo estás? For example, how are you? But in this particular context, ¿cómo just means what? ¿Cómo? Okay. ¿Cuándo? When? Okay. ¿Cuándo? This just means when. ¿Cuándo empieza la fiesta? When does the party start? Okay. Me da or me das? Okay. When you order food in Latin America, especially in Mexico, use the phrase me da or me das. Do not say me gustaría, okay? You could say something like quiero or quisiera, but the most common and easy way to order is by simply saying me da or me das. Me da is more formal, me das is more informal, but they are both polite. Many people, when they first learn this, think that it sounds rude. It is not rude. In fact, this is the most passive way to command someone to do something, okay? Me da unos tacos, por favor. Me das tu número telefónico, por favor? Okay? It's a very passive way to command someone to do something. So whenever you're ordering, whether it's food or drink, use me da or me das. Okay? Quiero. Just like I said, you can also use it when ordering. It's just a very common thing that we say in Spanish. Quiero, blah, blah, blah. Quiero salir. I want to go out. So on and so forth. Okay? Cerveza, you probably know this one. Beer. And vino is wine. Vino in the preterite third person singular means he came or she came or you came, right? So you could say, el vino con el vino. He came with the wine. El vino con el vino. Kind of funny, right? La cuenta. Very important to know. La cuenta, the bill or the check. Now, in Mexico, it's very common that they're going to hand you la terminal, which is the way to pay with card. So, for example, la cuenta, por favor. And they'll say, sí, claro que sí. ¿Será con terminal? Like, is it going to be with the pay terminal? Yes, please. Okay, great. Sounds good. All right. Terminal. Okay. La cuenta, check. Izquierda, left, which if you're watching this video, it'll be this is your left. Derecha is your right. And derecho is straight. It's confusing because derecho and derecha sound pretty much the same, right? Derecho, derecha. Okay? You can also use recto to say straight, but I most often just use derecho. Okay? Derecho, derecha, izquierda. I'm having to do it backwards for the video. Okay? All right. Yep. Got it. Got it. Cool. Cool. Okay. Ayuda. This is just a really good phrase to know. Ayuda. Por favor. Help. Please. All right. I feel like I use this all the time. In fact, I'm learning Mandarin Chinese, and I recently went to a hot pot restaurant. And at hot pot restaurants, you make these little sauces, with garlic and soy sauce and so on and so forth. And I wanted it to be kind of an authentic, dipping sauce. So I asked the guy in Chinese. I was trying to say like, help me, right? Which would be, 帮我, 帮我. I was like, 帮我, 请帮我, 我不知道做什么. Like, I don't know what to do. Help me, right? So this is really good. In any situation, right? I do that, or, let's say you're at a taco stand, you don't know what, sauce is spicy. You're like, I do that, pica or picante. Okay, no pica, no pica. Okay, okay. Yeah. Okay, I put this little line here because here are some words that are, things that you can say in Mexico. So, for example, chido. Chido in Mexico means cool. In the general Spanish-speaking world, if you say genial, that also means cool. But in Mexico, you can say chido. For example, que chido, how cool. Or güey, which is the most common way to call someone friend. Now, do not use this with people you don't know because it could be considered rude. However, if you're in Mexico, you're going to hear güey all the time. People use it all the time among their friends. I use it with my roommate, and sometimes when my girlfriend and I are playing and messing around, we'll call each other güey. Next is ¿qué onda?, which just means what's up, literally translating to what wave, like a microwave. Okay, ¿qué onda? So, for example, ¿qué onda? Wait, what's up, dude? And finally, chela, which is a way to say beer in Mexico. So instead of saying me da una cerveza, por favor, you could say me da una chela, por favor. Okay? Muy bien. Muchas gracias por ver este video. Espero que hayas aprendido algo nuevo. If you want to learn more Spanish with me, click the link in the video description to join my Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Our goal is to help you have a 10-minute conversation in Spanish in 90 days without feeling nervous. Click the link in the video description to check it out. Muchas gracias y espero que tengas buen día. Hasta luego.